Today, we're going to dive into creating a more simple transition. We're just going to jump in as if you are someone that knows nothing about Fusion. We'll start you off with how nodes work, and then we'll go through creating all of the elements as well as how to use different modifiers so that when we turn this into an actual transition file and then use it on the edit page, we're able to use the transition controls on the edit page. From DaVinci Resolve, I just have a brand new project. I'm going to jump right over into Fusion. At this point, we really don't have to be concerned with what the frame rate currently is or anything like that, because we're going to be making everything dynamically so that when we have everything pushed onto the edit page, we can use all of those transition controls. So don't be concerned with settings at this point. So from here, we're just in a project that currently doesn't have any timeline. We can simply just drag onto into the node tree. So I just grabbed this node here, which is a background node, and drug it down here into the node window. From there, what we can see that happened on the edit page is that it made a Fusion comp and a timeline. So this was added back in DaVinci Resolve 17 to make it super easy and quick to jump right into Fusion stuff. So let's jump back over into Fusion from here. And I'm going to zoom in down here, just holding Command or Control, and then using middle mouse wheel to zoom in a bit. And I'll close the effects library for now. One thing that you'll notice is yours is probably two views here, but we have a little dot here, which we can click to turn on the different viewers. I 9 times out of 10 don't really use that. There's a much easier way, and that is just taking a node that we want to view and dragging it up into the viewer and then releasing. If you're curious which node we're looking at, because we're seeing the same thing in both of them, up here it says which node that we're currently viewing. So this is background node 1 and this is media out 1. Because the background is being fed into media out 1, we're kind of seeing the same thing here. Let's just go in and change the color of this to a red for now. And so that is our background node. This is just going to be a solid color, which we're going to slide across the screen. In order to slide this across the screen, we need to have something to cut out the location of the screen. And so for that, we're going to be using a mask, and we're going to actually be using the rectangle mask. So right in our toolbar here, we have the rectangle mask. There are a couple additional ways. I want to quickly show you those. If I right click and go to add tool, we can go into mask, and here we have a rectangle. So we can add that in. Additionally, we can come up here to effects, and then in tools, it has the same categories here. We can go into mask, and there's our rectangle mask that we'd be able to drag in. For now, I'm just going to delete the one and close this. There's an additional way that we can go into adding in tools, and a lot of YouTube videos will typically see that being used. But unless you know the name of the tool that it's referred to as the select tool, really isn't usable because you actually need to know the name because you're going to be typing out the name. So for now, let's just go this way. So I'm going to take this rectangle mask here, and if we take a look at all of our nodes and these little, we have an arrow up here and a square down here. If I hover over them, a tooltip will pop up and it'll say what that particular thing is. And so this is just the mask out. And if I take a look at this background here, we can see that this is the output. And if we take a look at this one here, this is the mask effect. So if we wanted to mask this background, we could take the output of the rectangle and go to the input here, and we can just drop it on there. It'll also do the same thing. So now this rectangle is masking out that background that we were working with. In the rectangle, if we click on it and then come over into the inspector, we have a width and height. We could max those all the way out. And then the effect that we're going for, I'm just going to go to a single screen here and make this a little bigger, is if I move this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be having over here, it's then going to wipe across the screen. And then in the background, when the whole screen is covered over, that's when we're going to do the transition from the one shot to the other shot that is on the timeline. So the other thing to note here is that the X and Y, X is going to be left and right, Y is going to be up and down. The locations is 0.5 and 0.5, and it being in the middle of the screen. And this bottom corner is going to be 0, 0, and this top corner is going to be 1, 1. So if I drag this down, we can see that the values are pretty much 0. And if I drag it up to the top, the values are going to be 1. And so if I'm over here, we can see that for the X is 0, And then if I go up and down, that value is going to change, right? So all we're going to be doing for this particular project is we're just going to be animating it from left to right. If you want this to look a little fancier, you could put this on a slight incline or a slight angle, and then you could just drag these out and make them bigger. And then we could do something like that on an angle. It's up to you on what you want to do, but for now, I'm just going to keep it simple so everyone can follow along and then just have our box. So now we have to add in our animations. When we're adding in animations, typically we think of adding in keyframes. Keyframes are going to be a moment in time where we want something to be located, or we want a value to be something specific, and then a later point in time we want it to change to something else. In Fusion, everything is time is going to be frame based. So this is something that might take a little bit of time to wrap your head around, but if we were working in, let's say, a 30 frames per second timeline, and we have an animation, let's say going from the left side of the screen, that box, going to the right side of the screen in 1 second, so over 30 frames, we would keyframe frame 1, and then going to frame 30 would be the end of that animation. Because it's frame based, if we were to take that project file or that transition and go into a 60 frames per second timeline, because our animation is in frames, what's going to happen is it's going to take a half a second for that animation to go. So things are going to go really fast. If we were to go down to 24 frames per second, it's going to be slightly slower. So we don't want that, but we do kind of need to use the keyframes. And I'll quickly show you, because adding keyframes into a point, this is called a point when it's XY, it's going to add on another modifier, which is going to be a path modifier. So we're going to slide this all the way over to this side of the screen, and I'm just going to zoom out, just holding down Command or Control and using mouse wheel. If I slide this over here, we can see that we're pretty much at negative 0.05, sorry, or 0.5, sorry. Yeah, so it's going to be over here. Now, if I add in a keyframe and we bring it over to the other side, we're just going to come in a little bit in time on our timeline here, and then slide it to the other side, and over here it's just going to be 1.5. And so now we have this animation going from one to the other. But because they're keyframes, remember, we don't want it to be that. So to add in this animation from one side to the other, we need to add these keyframes in, because it's going to add on a modifier, a path modifier, and that's what this line is. It's the path modifier. But we can see that this displace is the actual keyframes for this value here, going from 0 to 1. So going from one side of this path to the other side of the path. If I was to double click in here, now our keyframes are gone, and in this control, we can easily move it left and right. But we need this value, obviously, to represent the timeline. So to do this, we're going to be using another modifier on this particular value, the displace value of an animation curve. So if we come into here and we right click and then we go into modifier, we can go animation curve. The cool thing with animation curve is there is a source. So instead of just using time, we can use different parameters within the comp. And so what we're going to set this to is transition, because this is kind of set up to be used as transitions. And what that's pretty much going to be is whatever the in value is and the out value of the comp, it's going to use that and then determine the length of the comp. And so that's going to give us our linear move. So then we have linear here, and that's just going to go from 0 to 1, or whatever our scale is here. So it's going to start off at 0 because our offset is set at 0, and then the scale is going to be a 1. So the easiest way to view this is if I go into custom, we can see that we have a linear scale here. So when it comes to time, in is going to be the time, out is going to be the value that it's spitting out. If I take a look up here, the time is going to be 1, so it's going to be the end of the timeline. And then here we can see that the value is going to be 1. Now remember that this displace just had to go from 0 to 1. So over the duration of this whole timeline, we can see that we have that animation there. So that's pretty much all we need. Now, if the timeline ever changes, so when it gets added onto the timeline as a transition, that is going to be a Fusion timeline or a comp that is going to have a timeline of its own. And if you've ever used the transition tools, we can make the transition longer or shorter. We're actually changing the duration of that transition. So we're changing the Fusion comp that's built inside of that. This is a lot of extra. You don't really have to be concerned with that. Just kind of follow along in how this works, and it'll make sense the more you end up using this. So that is going to be our transition. At this point, we could kind of be done, but I want to add a little extra flair of adding 2 other colors on here. So all we're going to do is just duplicate these elements that we have here. So I'm just going to highlight, and we're going to hit Control or Command C, and then we're just going to paste Control Command V to paste, and then we're going to do one more. So we have 3, and then we can put in here, I'm going to hit F2 and just change this to background 2, and then in here, we're going to change this to background 3. You can also right click and go into rename. And so now we have our 3 different backgrounds. So I'm going to come into background 2, and let's change this to green, and then background 3, we'll change that one to blue. So now we have all 3. Now the big thing that we want to remember here is, let's just go to 2 views so we can see this side by side, right? Is we want them to lay on top of each other. So it's kind of like they're all wiping on top of each other. And so to do this, we're going to have background 1 as the first element that's going to be on screen. And then we want background 2 to be over top of that element. So the easiest way to do this is taking from the output of one and putting it on top of the output of the other, which then it'll automatically create a merge. You can also grab a merge node, but then we have to, connect them up, and you have to know which one is the background and which one is the foreground. That is definitely useful information to know, but this is just an easier way to go about adding in, because it's automatically going to add that node in and then automatically connect it up based on how we hover or connect it one to the other. So like I was saying, we're going to take this and lay it over top of that. So we're going to come from the out of here, clicking on this black or gray box, and then dropping it on this gray box. So then this is going to be, as you can see here, this is going to be the foreground element, and then this is going to be the background element. So this is going to be laid on top. If we were to view this merge and drag it up here, we can see that this green is obviously over the top, right? And so in this animation, they're currently just on top of each other, but so we have to next add a slight delay for one to the other. So the easiest way to do this is if we go into this rectangle and come up here to modifiers, because we copied everything over, everything is going to be the same. All the modifiers and everything that we added in, they're all going to be the same. So all we have to do here is in this particular animation curve, we have to take this time here. Remember, this is time and then the output for that time. We just have to offset this. So let's just offset it by 1. And so as we can see, now our animation, the one comes on and then the other one comes on, and they both wipe off together. So that's all we're going to do with this one now too. We're going to connect this one on top, and let's just view that. And then we'll come into this rectangle here, go up to modifiers. We'll take this end and we'll change this to 2, because this one is 1 and then this one is just 0. So now we have all 3 of them, and this is pretty much our animation. Now, the one thing that you might notice is that this is going pretty slow. By default, the timeline for here is going to be 5 seconds. Now, when we're on the edit page and we add on that transition, remember, we can just grab the length of that transition, make it faster or shorter. So don't be so concerned with how fast elements are moving on and off here. You just have to take a look at the overall animation and is it displayed how you want. It might be slower because of the duration of the element that we have here. There are ways around this, but for now, this is going to be the easiest way to represent all of this. So now we have it going from one side to the other. And the biggest thing we have to do is just come to the end here and then just divide this by 2 and make sure that the whole screen is covered, because what we're going to be doing in the background is we're going to be switching from that first shot to the second shot in the background right at the middle. And the easiest way to do this is using a dissolve node. So I'm just going to now use the select tool since we know the name of it. We're going to hold down shift and then hit spacebar. Select tool is going to come up, and then in here, we'll just type in dissolve, and we'll come down here to dissolve. We'll add that in. The next thing to make this the easiest to understand is we're going to also add media in nodes. This is typical node that you would be pulling information from the edit page into Fusion. So we're going to add in 2 of them. We're going to add in a media in and another media in. So we have 2 media ins. I'm just going to delete this merge. We have our 2 media ins. Think of media in 1 as the first element, and then we have the transition and then media 2. So all we're going to do is take media 1, we're going to connect that into the dissolve, and we'll see that that comes in as the background. And then we'll take media 2, we're going to connect this in. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that these are red. And the reason that they're red is because the media ins don't really know what they're looking for. But we have the animation done, so now we're just doing this last animation. And then when we set this up to go to the edit page, those two elements will then be just pulling from the timeline. So don't be so concerned that they're red, because we're actually not going to be using those nodes. We're just using it to connect everything up so we accurately have everything represented here. So I'm just going to zoom out again just a little bit so I have a little more space here. Drag this over, take all of this, and we're going to take all of this stuff here because this is what we want laid over top. We're just going to connect here. And so now it's all just laid over top. Now in this dissolve, what we have to do is we have to have it flip from one to the other. Now remember, we have to have it pay attention to the time, and so we also have to use an animation curve here as well. So we're just going to right click in here, modify with animation curves. We'll open this up, we'll switch this to custom, and then all we're going to do is make 2 points, just like that. We're going to highlight this first point here, and we're going to have its time. Remember, in its time, we're going to have that as 0.5, and then the value is going to be 0. So it's going to be outputting 0 at 0.5. Let's highlight the second one here, and we'll put 0.50001, and then we'll have the output to be a 1. And so right in the middle of the timeline, it's going to go from this first one of 0, and then it's going to go to this one in 00001 of the duration of this timeline, and we won't have any issue with the numbers being that close to one another. So now we are pretty much done with this. All we need to do is set up the UI so that all of the different colors, we can have them represented on the edit page within the inspector. And then we just have to save it and put it into DaVinci Resolve's transition area so that we can then use it on the edit page. So what we're going to do is we're going to highlight everything, right? And the easiest way to highlight things is whatever you want to be shown first. There are a couple of ways to go into the code to change this, but I think that's a little more advanced than what we're going to be talking about here. But the big thing is that how you highlight things, that's how it's going to show up in the inspector. So because we only have 3 elements, we can make it look nice by having the first one, the second one, and then the third one. So to do that, we're just going to highlight from left to right because we have our background 1, our background 2, and then our background 3. And those are the only things that we're really going to be showing here. We're not highlighting the media ins. We're only highlighting these elements here. From here, we're going to right click and we're going to say macro, create macro. And then we have this macro window showing up, and this is going to be every single value input that we had for every single node. And so for now, we're just going to close this, and we have our background 1, and we have our background 2, and our background 3. If these aren't in this order, I mean, don't worry about how all of these are ordered. Just think of the background 1, the background 2, and the background 3. If it's background 1, background 2, background 3, perfectly fine. Don't worry about what's all in between all of these. That's not a big concern. Just the order from top to bottom with the backgrounds. If 2's above, then just close this and re-highlight everything. But background 1, we'll open this up. We'll close. Now think of, we can actually go into the actual nodes. If I click on this node, we can see them over here. So we have image, that's going to be image. We don't want that. Color, that's the color page. So this is the controls that we want. Now, all we have to say is, okay, we have color, we have red, green, blue, alpha. We can see that this is kind of confusing at first, but it has a lot to do with how the 4 corner thing works. But all of these values here are just the top left. So we're going to grab 1, 2, 3, and we don't actually need the alpha unless you want it, but I don't suggest getting it. So we have color. And if we want to put in here a value or a different name than just color, we could say color 1, right? So this is going to be the color 1 control. And so all we have to do now is close that. If we open up background 2, close image, and 1, 2, 3, and we can say this is going to be color 2. And then we'll open up background 3, close this, color 3, 1, 2, 3. Now that we're done with this, all we have to do is name this to whatever you want. I'm just going to call it 3 colors. Great. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to save this. I would say save it in a location that is the most easy accessible for you. So I just put it on your desktop or whatever, because then we're going to just copy it over into the correct spot in DaVinci Resolve. And there's an easier way to get to that. And because anyone that's watching this, you could be on Mac, Windows, or Linux, there's going to be a different location. But the way in which I'll show you here in a second, it's going to be the same for all 3 of us to find the folder. But for now, just save it to your desktop so that we can easily locate this. All right, so 3 colors, and then I'm just going to hit close, and close is going to ask me if I want to save it. Hit save, and then we're just going to save this to our desktop and then hit save. Now that it's saved there, all we have to do from here is if we come up to effects, we'll close the tools and we'll open up templates, and we'll open up edit, and then we'll go into transitions. And then from here, we can come into here and we can go show folder. Now, when we click on that, it's going to open up the location in which it is saved for me, which is here. Now, this is always going to be different. As you can see, it's using my username of Justin, app data, yada, yada, yada. Every system, like I said, Mac, Windows, Linux is going to be slightly different, but going into it this way through DaVinci Resolve's UI, it'll allow us to easily access it the same way. Now, all we have to do in here is drag in that transition. So I'm going to go quickly and grab my transition. Here's my 3-color transition. Drop it in here. My icon here is going to look slightly different. Don't be concerned with how this looks. That has to do with one of my other programs looking at that I use to actually modify a lot of these tools. So don't be concerned with how that looks. Just copy over the .settings file. Once we do that, we can close this. And now if we go over to the edit page, let me grab a video file so we can add this in. I'll actually grab 2 different video files. We'll drag those onto my timeline, and let's just cut this and cut that one because we want to do a transition between the two, our 2 shots here. And if we now go over into video transitions and we look for 3 colors, there we are. We can drag that on there. And if I take a look at this, there we have our 3 colors going from one shot to the other. We can come into here, click on it. If I open this up, we have our color 1, our color 2, and our color 3. So we can easily change the colors of all 3 of those. Like I was saying before, if we want it to go fast, we just drag it and make it shorter, and then it will go across the screen faster. If we want it to go slower, we go like that, and it'll go really nice and slow. And we don't have to be concerned with making the timing correct or anything like that because it's automatically all set up for you. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you do want to learn more about DaVinci Resolve, if it's the edit page, the color page, the fusion page, the Fairlight page, any aspect of DaVinci Resolve, I highly recommend taking a look at my website. I have a bunch of courses over there. If you want some pre-made assets that were already made for you that you can jumpstart and you don't have to take all this time to create them, I have a bunch of titles, transitions, bar charts, everything you can possibly think of on the website as well. If you're looking for like a one-on-one training session, I offer that as well, as even email support. If you're working on a project and you have a couple of questions, all of that is on the website and details on how to get in contact with me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Best of luck with making your next transitions. But until the next one, my name's Justin. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you guys later. Peace.